So the question is, do I approach dynamics differently for Atmos? And no, not really. The front wall has the really important stuff, the LCR, and the stuff that's going around the back, you don't need to compress it. What's really interesting is when you're mixing in stereo, everything is jammed together, so you don't really think about whether one thing needs to be limited and another doesn't, because it's all going to go through a limiter at the end. That's just the way it works. Whereas in Atmos, you absolutely think about that. And this mix, I'm using, you can see the objects I'm using, they're the ones filled in. And it's not that many. My template's gotten to the point now where I only have, I think, it's either 3 or 6 spare objects just for my template, so that I can be really precise about, okay, I want this here in this distance setting because that's the way the Dolby binaural works. I don't even really think about it. Every once in a while there'll be something where it doesn't feel right, but then I can work on just that one thing. It'll be something like the transients of the kick and snare won't be right. And so by having a limiter where, the Fab Filter Pro L is great for this, because it's true multi-channel. And also, if you hold down the command key, I think, it might be the shift key, as you bring the threshold down, it'll bring the output up. And so it's perfectly level matched. So all you're listening for is the change in the kick and snare. But it becomes just coloration on individual elements. So I really don't think about it much at all. The other thing is, most Atmos mixes are being done from stems of the stereo mix. Even the Atmos stuff where I've done the stereo, I will print 40 or 50 stems, so I've got everything separate but sounding like the mix. And very seldom do I need to do anything. The only time I'll need to do something is if they've gone nuts in mastering. So now I'm trying to compensate for whatever happened in mastering. But even that, other than a little bit of EQ, it's usually the drum transients. And when you get that right and possibly a little bit of EQ, and again, that's only on a couple of important things. No one's going to hear that, the 4th synth pad doesn't sound exactly the same. It doesn't matter. And it's in a different space anyway, so it will sound different. So yeah, it's a really long answer, but I don't really worry about it that much. It's only specific elements.
So do you mix in headphones, or do you have speakers set up in your room?
Both. I'm very lucky. I have a lot of speakers.
How do you find it translates?
Well, I start every Atmos mix in headphones, every single one of them, because I start my stereo mixes in headphones as well. Because for me, it's a way that I can be setting up the mix, getting used to it, figuring out what's where, trying out some things. But I'm not really mixing, right? I'm just kind of listening in headphones while I do stuff, and it's this amazing freedom. There's no jeopardy in it. I can screw around on something, but it doesn't matter. I'm not mixing yet. And now I've gotten to the point where I will do most of my mixing in headphones on some projects and then put the whole record up on speakers and have a listen to it. With the Atmos, I'm on speakers more, but all of the prep happens, because that way, instead of doing something you think is amazing on speakers, but 99% of the world is going to hear it in headphones, and you've got to hear both the Dolby binaural and the Apple spatialization. And if you do a great mix on speakers and then you go into headphones, and it's then you're screwed, because now you basically start over. Whereas I've already gotten it great, this feels great, it feels like the stereo, it's awesome, and I've done panning stuff that I think will work. Then when I put it on speakers, either that stuff works and I don't really have to do much, or I change the panning. And then things like the crazy spinning helicoptering stuff, I'll do that in speakers because it's way more fun. But again, those are elements that it doesn't matter. That won't change the experience. Well, it'll change the experience, but it won't change the mix in any meaningful way, whether or not those spin around. So it doesn't matter. Those can go nuts on speakers. And if that doesn't really translate, it doesn't matter. Every once in a while in this track, you'll hear a more important instrument kind of shift, and that will really change the panning. But on a track like this, it's fine. So in some cases, the Atmos will fold down differently. But yeah, I start and finish almost every mix on headphones, because you're wearing your studio on your head. I can travel. I was doing mix recalls in the hotel this morning, and I didn't have to second guess anything.
When it comes to lead vocals, I notice a lot of mixers don't put the lead vocal in the center channel, which would seem like the obvious place to put it. What's your philosophy on that?
I don't have a philosophy, it's more of a preference. So we're so used to what a phantom sender sounds like. So when something's in the left and the right on a stereo mix, it sounds like it's in the middle because it's the same coming out of left and right, but of course it isn't. It's coming out of two different speakers and you're not exactly the same distance from it. So it's a phasey mess by the time it gets to you. And that sounds great. And we're really used to it. And that's the sound of a record. Whereas to me, with the center channel, somehow it's too direct. It's too clean or something. It jumps out. So what I do, kick, snare, bass, and lead vocal usually, is in Pro Tools, there's a divergence control. So I print my own stems and I print them stereo anyway, so it's automatically into the left-right. But then with the divergence control, you can start keystoning the panning into the middle. So if I turned it all the way down so there was no divergence, it would just be center channel. Full divergence is left-right with no center. So I will just start to cheat things in. So for me, the center channel is this amazing empty speaker that has nothing coming through it that I can make anything pop out of the mix. If I start to lose the vocal, all I do is put it in the center. I don't turn it up. So I use the center as an accent to the left-right. And as I get used to it more and more, I'm using more and more in the center. But I love the sound of the Phantom center. I just really love the way it sounds. It sounds like a record to me because they've been using it for so long.
I'm just kind of wondering, when you're mixing in Atmos, if you have to kind of fight a little bit of a tendency of sometimes getting a little too gimmicky with the automation and
absolutely
like restrain yourself.
Absolutely. So that first track I played, the 1975 track, I know the balls are floating all over the place the whole time, but sometimes it's only a tiny thing that's in those that's spinning around. When I first did it, I thought, this is fantastic. There are no vocals, really. I can do anything I want and I can do it all the time. And it was exhausting. What happens a lot in that song is things will collapse back down to the front wall, because then I get to build it all up again and it's new and it's exciting when I do it. So it's definitely about picking your moments. If you just go nuts with it, one, it can be really distracting, but also you can very easily destroy the song. If you've got drums and percussion, sometimes you can put the percussion in the back and it's amazing. Most of the time, what you end up with is a drum groove that isn't as groovy as it used to be because it's missing the percussion. Then you've got some percussion in the back that nobody wants to hear on its own. And that can absolutely destroy the song. So you've got to be really, really musical as you do the panning, both static panning and the motion stuff.
So basically what you're talking about is building dynamics, not just with volume dynamics, but also with spatial dynamics.
Absolutely.
Kind of like,
yeah,
this like peaks and valleys.
Absolutely. I always think about this front wall, and the front wall is the song. Sometimes you can wrap that front wall around a little bit and up a little bit, and that's fantastic. But generally, it's the left, center, right. Then you've got whatever elements are left over, you can decide how to do it. Like on the Hozier stuff, he has these gigantic stacks of background vocals. So I can build choirs that go all the way around and sometimes even keep them a little bit out of the front. So they go from the wide to the wide around the back and up. And that's great because it's one thing that can fill the room. But if you have lots of little things dotted all over the place, they just become distracting. The master bus on this was done when I mixed it in stereo, and then all of the sounds are stems made through that master bus from the stereo mix. But on this, it's every single element is separate. When I did the stems for this album, there were close to 300 stems across 12 songs. So it's very, very separate, but the master bus stuff is baked in. But my master bus is EQ, a tiny bit of stereo widening, and a limiter that doesn't do a whole lot. So there isn't that much anyway. If I need to do something, I'll use like the FabFilter Pro L, which is a multi-channel limiter, but very seldom. Don't really need to do it that much. Basically for anything, my stereo box looks the same. It's about individual elements, because if you blow up everything, then nothing sounds loud. It's like with distortion. If everything is distorted, everything sounds the same. Whereas if there's lots of clean stuff and one distorted thing, that sounds like, wow, it really sticks out. So it's the same for me. So the mix bus is more about the overall EQ shape, and then a limiter just to keep stuff in check. But it's not the way my mix sounds, if that makes any sense, in terms of that kind of processing.
How has your approach to mixing for Atmos evolved over time versus like your initial assumptions to where you are now?
The main thing is you just find stuff to do. Like I've finally gotten to the point now where when I'm mixing in stereo, I think like, oh no, I'm not, because that's an Atmos thing that I do. So it's gotten to the point where I have things that I like to do that are starting points in Atmos that have nothing to do with mixing in stereo. But the approach isn't that different. I mean, it's always about the balance of the song, finding the elements that are the song. So if you took out everything else, no one would care, and making that awesome. And that's the same in either format. So the philosophy is exactly the same. The tool set has changed, definitely. Like that took me a really long time to figure out how do I take a circle of 9 things and spin them and go up and down and make that work with the automation that's feeding into the render. But that's a technical problem. I knew I wanted to do it, so then I figured out how to do it. You have many more opportunities to completely destroy the song in Atmos than you do in stereo. Because there's so many different places you can pan stuff that'll be wrong.
Something else, what's on your mix bus? Because you said there's like the same thing, what is it?
It's EQ, a little stereo widening, and a limiter. I mean, that's it. I don't feel like I've changed anything about what I do, but when I look at how much I used to process stuff compared to now, it's kind of insane how much more I used to do. And now my mixes are much more simple, but I don't think they feel different. You know, everybody's hearing changes because it's your taste, right? You're just imposing your opinion on what you get. So my opinion changes, but it's more like sonically I just get sick of stuff, so I get rid of it. And then sometimes I feel like I need something, so I try and find something. And then if it works 2 or 3 times in a row, then it's in the template and it's the thing that I'll use. And so it's ever changing. I mean, I think I'm on version 88 of my template. Also, you can't overstate using a personalized HRTF. So head-related transfer function, it's the thing that defines how your head is shaped as the sound, like if it's coming from here, it hits this ear at this angle, this ear a bit later at this angle. Everybody's head and ear and inner ear are totally different. And it's the pinna here that directs the sound into the ear canal that is crazy different on everyone's ear and is the most important part of it. And so they have apps. Dolby has an app. I'm not sure, Audeze might have an app. There are apps to do one just based on video, and they're not perfect, but they're way better than the standard one. That's like, okay, that's supposed to work pretty well for everybody, but think about it, I mean, that's insane. And it works better for white males than anyone else on the planet. Now that's weird, isn't it? It's because it was done as an average of a lot of white men. And there have only been 2 of them in the history of HRTFs. There was one in the 60s, and I think they updated it in the 80s with like a few more people. So definitely use the apps to give yourself a personalized HRTF, and you should be able to externalize a lot better.
Do you also check on other types of headphones to kind of see how it's translating?
I don't with other headphones, no, because I've gotten to the point where I just know the headphone's fine. But like I will route my mixes to my monitor speakers, the Mac monitor. Right. Because those, I mean, they're not good, but they've done a lot of tweaking so that when you listen to Apple Music on them, stuff sounds good. So if your mix doesn't sound good coming out of there, then you get a problem. So that's my Oratones. Audeze makes a pair called Maxwell's, which were done for gamers. And those can be hooked up to the head tracking inside of the renderer. So you can actually check that head tracking with the Dolby binaural, which you can't do in a lot of other instances. So it's important to check the head tracking definitely, and generally to check the Apple Spatial. I will use their headphones. With the Atmos mixes, again, I'm working from stems, so it's not this really, really tweaky, like, oh, the low end is not, you know, there's something that I didn't notice on my speakers, like that's sort of taken care of. So it's really about how it works collapsing down to stereo and how the binaural encoding is working and stuff like that. It's not as much about the really small sonic things that you would check with other speakers for.
But in general, you're pleased how it translates to other, like,
and I think
lesser quality.
And I think a lot of that is because I actually build the mixes in headphones. So I know what's going to happen to it. And then at that point, it's just, well, what headphones do you like? And people will listen on different stuff. And I know that sonically these are fine, but also I'm not changing the sonics that much. So that mix has already been improved. Now, if it's a terrible sounding mix that doesn't translate, it'll probably be a terrible sounding Atmos mix that doesn't translate, but it's not for me to completely change the sonics of the song, unless they tell me to do that, which would be fun, but that doesn't happen very often at all.
How'd you decide on those Odyssey modules versus?
They're subtly different. There's an overall, like, amazing thing to them in terms of the space, and like we heard on that second track, that's the same kind of across their line of stuff, but it's the upper mid-range and the top end that changes. And it's really, for me, it's about, sometimes I'm listening to something that sounds amazing, but I'm just listening. Other times I listen and it's like, okay, I can get to work. Like, I would know what to do next. And so there are lots and lots and lots of headphones and speakers that I couldn't possibly work on, even though I think they sound amazing. And it really took until I'd spent more time going back and forth to be like, okay, I think I can work on these. And then there was no transition period whatsoever. I got home, I unplugged my Sonys, I plugged these in, and I haven't plugged the Sonys back in since. You should definitely just try the different ones on and listen to something you know. And you hear what I'm talking about. It's sort of in the upper vocal range and things like that. I mean, I thought I would never come off the Sonys. And Chris, I don't know, he really wanted me to come off the Sonys. And he was absolutely right.